Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to the Surrogate Session. I'm Christina Ramirez, and I am your host today with Surrogate Heather Darling, Judge Michael Wright, and Attorney Laurie Steinberg. Today's topic is navigating the adoption process. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping items. All participants are muted, but you have the ability to ask questions throughout the program by typing them in. The panelists will answer your questions after the presentation. So you should see the Q&A on the right side of your screen. You can type them right in. Also, a recording of today's session will be made available on the Surrogate's website at a later date, and that is at marssurrogate.com. And usually that happens within a few days, so it should be there next week. So now let me introduce to you our panelists. Surrogate Heather Darling. She's an accomplished attorney. The surrogate received her bachelor's degree from NYU in Finance and International Business and earned her law degree in Juris Doctor from the Seton Hall School of Law. Heather is a former Morris County freeholder and served as deputy of the board. She was elected in 2019 as the first woman surrogate in Morris County. The surrogate today has as her guest the Honorable Michael Paul Wright. Judge Wright received his law degree and Juris Doctorate from Rutgers Law School. In 1990, Judge Wright was the first African-American assistant prosecutor in the history of Morris County Prosecutor's Office. He also served as chief assistant prosecutor and head of the trial team. Judge Wright then became the first African-American appointed to the Superior Court bench in the Morris Sussex vicinage. He has handled both civil and special civil matters and served as presiding judge of the Family Division for 2 years. Attorney Laurie Steinberg, Esquire. Ms. Steinberg graduated from Brandeis University and received her Juris Doctor from Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law. She is the operating member at Pine and Steinberg LLC in Summit, New Jersey. Ms. Steinberg practices exclusively in the area of adoption and family law. She has finalized thousands of adoptions. She has completed 40 hours of mediation training and offers pro bono legal consultations and family law workshops at the National Council for Jewish Women. Our prominent guest panelists today add a wealth of knowledge along with a surrogate on today's important topic. As a reminder, please use the Q&A box to send in your questions, and I will now turn the program over to the surrogate, Judge Wright and Ms. Steinberg.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome to our audience today, as well as Judge Wright and Attorney Steinberg. As people in the audience may know, this is part of our series, our ongoing series called the Surrogate Sessions. It's an educational series designed to advise people about the matters that are handled here in the Surrogate's Court. And this particular subject is something that I feel is extremely important to so many, whether it's children who need a family, who are looking for family to share love with, or families who are looking for that child to add to their family or complete it. This past fall, I had the absolute joy of participating in Adoption Day with Judge Wright. And it was an incredibly moving experience. And while we saw families being built that day and permanently unified, in New Jersey, while there are about 1,000 adoptions that take place on an annual basis, there's approximately 20,000 kids that actually age out of foster care each year across the country. So today we're going to have a dialogue where these two experts that are here with me today talk about their respective roles in literally hundreds of adoptions that have united children with their forever families. So Judge Wright, I'm going to flip it over to you and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. For those who signed in early, the judge said he was only doing this for me. It might be the last time that he does one of these with Attorney Steinberg and I, but I don't know about that. We participate in the future because he's such an incredible expert and wealth of knowledge and really cares about what he does, cares about kids and cares about what he does on the bench from the day I've met him, when I was practicing before him, and as a friend. I thoroughly respect Judge Wright, his opinions, and the way that he treats the people that are before him. So, Judge, do you want to begin with the reasons why people adopt and the benefits of adoption?
I'll be happy to, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for those warm and kind words. And you sure do know how to get to me. Kindness is the way to my heart. Obviously, I will now be participating in whatever you ask me to participate in. It is a joy to work with you, Madam Surrogate. Your desire to be part of Adoption Day was much appreciated, and your participation just incredible. Likewise, to be on a panel with Laurie Steinberg talking about adoption is an honor. Quite honestly, there's probably no attorney in New Jersey who knows more about the adoption process. So we are lucky and honored to participate with her. The reasons families choose to adopt are myriad and varied. And I imagine in each instance, deeply personal. But the result in each is the same. The result is that children in need of a warm, nurturing, loving environment receive one. And honestly, is there any greater testament to the humanity that we hope resides in all of us than to open up one's heart and home and raise a child as your own? Every time and I know Ms. Steinberg can attest to this, every time I perform an adoption, my eyes well up as I talk to the family about their responsibilities and thank them for loving and caring for this child. But I always tell them, because the adoption process usually takes a significant period of time, I think Ms. Steinberg's going to talk about that. I'm simply placing my imprimatur, my signature upon a judgment, making legal what is already probably the case for many years, that they have nurtured and loved this child. And it's certainly an honor that I can make it official and legal. The benefits are, I think, obvious for both. I've discussed the child's benefit, receiving a forever home, but just this morning, and I'm being completely honest with you, I presided over an adoption where the mother and father had lost 2 children that had passed on due to illness. And instead of, or perhaps because of, they reached out to yet another child in terrible need and is going to raise them as their own. So the benefits, I think, probably, the child, clearly they get removed from foster care, but the parents also, by opening up their heart, are probably being blessed. No, not probably, are being blessed as well. The cases that I preside over, for the most part, the adoptions come to me by way of the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. So the children oftentimes have been in foster care for some time. I do handle the occasional private adoption. Those get filed, and Ms. Steinberg will talk to you about how those get filed and come before me. But I would say 70% are children whose parents can't care for them and come before me with foster parents. We call them resource parents. Resource parents who are kin, grandmothers, aunts, all seeking to care for a child in need. The benefits are amazing, and I love participating in the process. Thank you, Madam Surrogate.
Thank you, Judge. And Laurie, thank you so much for being here today. You, as I said earlier, truly are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I think everyone watching today will benefit from the fact that we have you as our panelist. When I conferred with Judge Wright about who it was that we were going to bring here, he did highly recommend that we have your presence with us today. And yes, you were his first choice, absolutely. And I understand that adoption that took place this morning was actually one that you handled.
So I was in front of Judge Wright just a couple of hours ago.
So, Laurie, can you give us your perspective on, why adoptions take place? What typically brings them about? What are the reasons? What are the benefits? The same thing that Judge Wright just answered.
Absolutely. And Surrogate Darling, Judge Wright, thank you so much for having me be part of this panel. I'm always happy to share information that can help people understand the adoption process. So one of the things you just said, Surrogate Darling, is what is the typical scenario? And the first thing I want to say is there is no typical scenario. There are so many different ways to get to an adoption. And I've encountered more than I can count. But as Judge Wright was saying, in terms of just sheer numbers in the state of New Jersey, the most frequent type of adoption that we see is a foster care adoption, which means that the state has come in, taking guardianship of the child because for whatever reasons, the biological parents are unable to care for the children. And so just in terms of sheer numbers, more we call them DCP&P adoptions, Division of Children's Protection and Permanency. More of those occur on an annual basis than private placement adoptions, only because there's such a need and there are so many children in foster care in need of permanency. But in terms of people who might be tuning in to learn about other kinds of adoptions, there are step-parent adoptions, there are private placement adoptions, there are agency adoptions, there are co-parent adoptions, same-sex adoptions. There are so many different kinds of adoptions, and hopefully, and none of them are typical, but all of them end up in the same place, fingers crossed, which is a united forever family. So there are so many reasons why families reach out, whether it's, because they want to expand their family and can't do so another way, whether they want to help out someone else in their family who might be now under the state's guardianship and they want to come in as kin and keep that family as united as possible. There are just so many different paths. And I think the important thing to remember is that if the process seems long to you, the adopting family, the adopting parent, just understand that T's need to be crossed and I's need to be dotted, but everyone has the same goal, which is to keep that best interest of that child forefront and make that family whole in the best way possible.
Judge, I'm going to flip this one to you. What about the child's perspective? How is that factored in? And after the adoption, are there safeguards that are employed by the court to ensure that that child is doing well in this situation?
When you ask about the child's perspective, when a child is of sufficient age to be questioned in this regard, I love for the lawyers to either ask those questions or I'll step in and ask, and whether the child is shy or rambunctious, it's always the same smile and answer. Yes, I want to be adopted. This is my mom. This is my dad. It's beautiful. And in terms of the child's perspective, again, if they're of age, the adoption report, the adoption evaluation will speak to that as well. I usually get a file from the surrogate's office that is always immaculate, all of the pleadings, the best interests report. And of course, these are very important. I want to make sure, as Attorney Steinberg said, legally, I's dotted, T's crossed, but I also want to know more about the family and the child. I want to make sure when I put my name on a judgment of adoption, I'm doing the right thing. Post-adoption, especially with regard to the Division of Child Protection and Permanency cases, there will be post-adoption checks by the division, often without any notice, to make sure families are caring for these children. And Ms. Attorney Steinberg also educated me recently when the three of us were discussing this issue that even in the private adoptions, there is an oversight component. Is that right, Madam Attorney?
So just a small clarification. So in a private placement adoption, you have your preliminary hearing, which gives the adopting family custody of the child pending the finalization. But at that point, by the preliminary hearing, there has been a full home study completed. There has been background checks done. The post-placement visits will occur in between that preliminary hearing and then the final hearing. And typically, I want to say it's 3 to 4 post-placement visits that will occur. And then at the time of the final hearing and the adoption judgment is signed, then the parents and the child are their full family. And then their process is done.
So you both talked about the benefits and how we may look at this after the fact. What about people that are considering adopting? I'm going to start, Laurie, with you on this. What are some of the pros and cons and things people really need to think about before they set down the path to adoption?
I think that it's important to understand that even though, of course, when people hear about adoption, it's a happy, joyous thing, and it should be, that it's time consuming, it's emotionally draining occasionally, it can be financially draining. I think if you're going to step into this process, it needs to be eyes wide open. Nothing happens overnight. Bearing in mind, everyone in the court system, everyone, if you're dealing with a state adoption, everyone in the DCP&P system, everyone's looking out for the child. It does take an emotional and financial toll on everyone involved. So it's important to understand when you go into this, different kinds of adoptions may have faster resolutions than others. And I can talk about that, you know, a little further down in the panel, but I think it's important to ask an attorney, or even, you know, if you know somebody who's been through the adoption process, depending on what kind of an adoption you are pursuing, you need to understand it's going to take up time, money, and emotional resources. The more information you have going into it, the easier the process will be for you.
Let me, if I may, just interject on when the matters that that I mentioned come to me 70% of the time. There is really no cost associated where you're a foster parent, a foster resource parent. The division will handle much of the costs, if not provide a stipend during the process of. But it's a long process. If you offer yourself up as a resource parent with the thought that if the child's parents' rights are terminated, that you will be an adoptive parent, the process is at least a year long during the period of litigation. Then, if I, after a trial, terminate parental rights to the biological parents, or the biological parents choose to surrender, I will happily grant an adoption, but then there's an appeals process that is always instituted. So then again, you're waiting for the final imprimatur saying that actually the adoption doesn't take place until after the appeal, excuse me. So I've ruled, I've terminated parental rights, or they've surrendered. Still, you can't adopt until the appeal process is over, and that takes time as well. So I've noticed that parents, resource parents, be they kin or unrelated, fall into two types. The ones who have offered up to be short-term placements for the children to be stabilized, and then long-term placements saying we'll adopt if the parents don't get their act together to be colloquial. It takes a special human being to get into to enter into the process of a resource parent looking to adopt and awaiting the final decision of the court as to whether there will be a termination of parental rights, the appeal, and then if the termination is upheld, then the adoption.
So Judge, here's a question for you, because I've been before you and I know the way you conduct your courtroom. And I have not a doubt in my mind that when you're handling an adoption, you let people know that they're not embarking on a forever journey, right? And maybe you have a kid that is 1 year old, or maybe you have a young adult that is 14 years old. And these are very different things that you're bringing into your home, very different circumstances. So understanding that everybody has good days and bad days, and teenagers are going to be teenagers and they're going to act up because they're going to test you. That's just the nature of it. What do you say when somebody's embarking on this process after you've rendered that judgment?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I tend to say this child is going to be your child as if born unto you. And that's the circumstance. There's no difference between an adopted youngster and a youngster that was born. They are going to try you. They are going to be everything that we were as children. So you better be prepared. I guess it's also fair to say that some of these youngsters have endured circumstances that none of us ourselves would want to endure or like to see any child endure. So many of these youngsters, to a certain degree, may need special love, special care, and special support. And I know the Division of Child Protection and Permanency must, by virtue of statutory law, share with the prospective resource parents all the potential issues. And yet it never ceases to amaze me. There's always a resource family willing to try to restore a youth to good emotional, physical health. It's just beautiful.
And I will say, if I can just throw something in there, I do want to give a shout out to DCP&P. Not only do they share with these resource placement homes what they can expect to deal with and the issues that a child may have, they will provide services from the time of placement through adoption, and often even beyond the time of adoption, to help get that child to good emotional and physical well-being. So I just want to give a shout out, because the division really does do everything that they can. They don't just give the information to the parent, to the adopting parents, and say good luck with that. They really do provide ongoing support and services.
Laurie, let me then ask you something further on that. So DCP&P may stay there and assist going forward with as resource. Is there financial assistance available for foster parents or adoptive parents?
Yes, there can be. Yes, not every case. It's a case-by-case basis, but there is what we call an adoption subsidy that can be provided by the state think of it as a child support payment to help a resource family provide for that foster child. Then if the foster child becomes an adopted child, there is a process in which an adoption subsidy may be reached, an agreement may be reached with the state, where the state continues to provide the family with a subsidy and, a specific given amount until the child reaches the age of majority. So for families that qualify and for the children that qualify, an adoption subsidy can help out with the cost of raising a child that may or may not have additional services needed to ensure their well-being going forward.
Judge, let me ask you a question on legally. What are the rights of biological parents to remain in a child's life, either in a DCP&P case after people have fostered, or in the case of an adoption that has been arranged prior to the child's birth for private placement?
Private placement, I'm going to ask Ms. Laurie, Ms. Steinberg to speak to. With regard to the DCP&P cases, it's clear. The biological natural parents have every right to be in the child's life until such time or if termination should come to pass. In fact, the law as it stands in New Jersey is during the life of the FN litigation, prior to it moving to a guardianship, during the life of an FN litigation, which will be a year, 12 months, the parent retains their parental rights, which have been deemed by the Supreme Court to be of constitutional proportion. Only thing I can do is, if I determine that certain orders are necessary to protect the children, I may restrict those rights in different ways. I'm sorry, Mom, Dad, you're going to have supervised visits with your child until such time as your mental health treatment progresses. Dad or Mom, I'm going to have to restrict you. Strike that. If there's resource care, I may order that visitation be through therapeutic visitation, the program, to ensure the child, again, is safe, hopefully downgrading it from therapeutic visitation to supervised visitation to unsupervised visitation until there's a reunification. The Division of Child Protection and Permanency is ordered to do everything in their power to reunify during the life of the litigation. At the permanency hearing, if the natural parents have not moved forward sufficiently to remediate the issues that led to the removal, then the permanency plan will shift, termination of parental rights. But the division still works with the family to co-plan for reunification in case the parents suddenly remediate the issues that led to removal. So the parents absolutely have continued rights until adoption. If there's an adoption in New Jersey, the natural parents are without rights to the child in any shape, form, or fashion, and any agreements prior to adoption regarding visitation cannot be enforced. With regard to private adoptions, could I ask Attorney Steinberg to answer that question?
Sure, and with respect to the last part of what you just said, I'm just going to take it from there because there's a concept known as open adoption. That concept is not recognized under New Jersey law. Open adoption means an ongoing relationship, whether it's simply communication, sharing of pictures, visitation, telephone contact, any way you want to define communication. There's a communication between the biological family, parent, and the adoptive family. Many states recognize that and in fact encourage that for their own reasons. New Jersey does not recognize that. So what you have is a situation where New Jersey isn't going to deny an adoptive and biological family the right to communicate if they so choose. But what New Jersey won't do is enforce any agreement between a biological and an adoptive family to continue that access if that access then becomes denied by the adopting family. Because in New Jersey, the adopting family has stepped into the role of legal parent, and the biological parent no longer has any legal right, no longer has standing to make application for any contact with that child. So I always tell my clients in a private adoption, sometimes they have a prior relationship with the biological family and they want to keep that. They want to make sure that their adopted child has the right to know where they came from, who their biological family is. And I say to them, that's wonderful, but be aware. And I want to make sure that the biological family or parent is aware. That is an agreement that you have between yourselves. Any court who's asked to enforce that kind of an agreement, they're going to say, no, thank you. We won't even entertain the question. So it's important, especially from a biological parent's perspective. The biological parent needs to understand if they're going to enter into an adoption arrangement, that they may think to themselves, we have all the rights to see the kid, to get pictures, to have updates. Once the adoption is finalized, that can't be enforced. And it's important that all parties know that going into it.
Laurie, let me ask you another question, and this is kind of lightning round because we've got about 5 minutes to finish up before we open it for the Q&A. So I'm going to ask you to be direct on these. The home study, can you give me a little bit of information on what the home study is all about?
Sure. Every adoption, barring a step-parent adoption, is going to have a home study. I'm sorry, and a co-parent adoption if the parties are married. Other than that, you're going to have a home study. A home study is a deep dive into the adopting parents' backgrounds, monetary, educational, medical, emotional well-being. It's a deep dive done by an accredited adoption agency to make sure that the adoptive parents are fit for adoption. And they will then give, at the end of their home study, they will give a recommendation to the court as to whether the adoption is appropriate. Home studies are done by the state if you're dealing with a foster adoption. So it doesn't cost the adopting family anything if you're a resource parent headed to adoption. If you're doing a private placement adoption, that can be costly. You're going to be working with an adoption agency. So you need to know right up front that's an additional expense that you're going to have to pay.
So, Judge, let me ask you this. Earlier, we talked about the fact that a child's opinion, when they're of sufficient age, would be factored in to making a determination as to whether they do or don't want to be adopted. What about children that are in foster care or in facilities that are of advanced age that say, you know what, I really just don't want to be adopted at this point? What is the alternative in that case?
Good question. And I just wanted to, since you referred back to your former question, one of the wonderful aspects of the children in court docket is that the child has their own attorney, known as the law guardian. And it is that attorney's job throughout the life of the litigation to let me know what the child wants, not what the child's best interests are, what the child wants. So that's very helpful to me. With regard to older children, it is of such concern to our judiciary that our administrative director, Judge Grant, recently began a separate and intense scrutiny of all children who are in foster care for 3 years or more. And our job and all the stakeholders' job was to figure out why they're still in foster care and fix it. And so kudos to Judge Grant there. In the specific instance where you suggest the system has been unable to place the older youngster, 16, 17, the permanency plan will often transition to something called independent living, where the division, again, and I see in the chat box, Morris County DCP office is awesome. I agree. Their law guardians, their deputy attorney generals are caring and caring people, and they are possessed of a legal acumen that is truly impressive. Once a case transitions to independent living, all of a sudden now the services, the specifically tailored services, also transition. Now we are equipping youngsters for the real world. How do you create a resume? How do you interview? How do you balance your checkbook? Or at least I still balance my checkbook. I don't think they exist anymore. But how you handle your financial issues. And it is amazing to see how youngsters, as anyone would understand them appropriately to be, scared to death of stepping into the real world, are given the skills they need, oftentimes scholarship money to go to college, stipends, for their rent as they try to move from dependence to independence, and it works more times than it doesn't.
Thank you, Judge. Laurie, I'm gonna ask you one last question. If you could keep this to about a minute, and I know I'm asking a lot there, but I want to flip it to Christina. Where does somebody start when they're considering adoption?
Call an adoption attorney. I have to say that the adoption attorney network in New Jersey, we're not a large group, okay? So call an adoption attorney, and I can only speak for certain for my office, but I know that anyone who calls my office looking for basic information is going to get it. We will stay on the phone with you. We will give you different options. We will hear your basic story and say, well, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Start with an attorney, because there are so many steps that have to be taken. If you try to undertake it yourself, and then you get to the surrogate court and you're missing something, you're going to have to start back from zero. Call an attorney, and all of the adoption attorneys across the state that I work with frequently, we're all happy to help. We're not going to charge you to call us and say, hey, I don't even know where to begin. This is my story. Am I calling the right place? What do I do next? We will give you guidance. So call.
Which is evidence of the fact that you're here, or by the fact that you're here today, giving advice to the people that are listening with the judge. And I thank you both for the conversation that we've had. And now I'm going to flip it over to Christina so that she can ask some questions that have been submitted by the audience, with the understanding that we're not here today to give specific legal advice with regard to anyone's matter, but we're here to give general advice so that we can help people that are in the process, thinking about the process, want to help somebody who's involved in the process and whatnot. So I'm gonna give it my role now to Christina and allow our two experts here to answer, because clearly they know far more than I about this.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Heather. I also want to say that Judge Wright has a fan club out here. We've had a couple of comments that he has presided over some adoptions, and folks are extremely happy with him. And also there's one comment that they had an adoption 16 months ago and they're getting ready for a second foster adoption in April. So that's pretty wonderful, Judge.
Excellent.
So thank you for your service there from all of us. Okay, so some of these questions, we covered at a high level, so I'm going to go ahead and ask some of them again, and maybe we can go a little bit deeper. So the first question is, as you look at public or private adoptions, can you talk, what are the key differences between each, and maybe if there's an advantage of one over the other for an adoptive parent?
Sure.
May I just say, and I apologize, as a judge, I'm not going to be able to give much advice. I'm happy to answer questions like the ones posed by Her Honor and global, the workings of the court. But I just want everyone to know that if I don't answer with regard to questions for advice, it's simply the role I have to play. So I'll ask if Attorney Steinberg can help here.
Sure. So as I understand the question, Christina, question is just, what is the difference if you're considering adoption between going the public route, meaning a DCP&P potential adoption, and a private adoption? Is that my understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so if you're going to consider going the private adoption route, there are pros and cons. Same with the public adoption route. Let's talk about the public adoption route first, because I think there are some people in the public who's participating today who've had some experience with DCP&P or maybe are in that process now. So when you're working with DCP&P as a resource parent and you hope to get to that foster to adopt place, you definitely have pros. You have a whole support system. That's number one. You have your caseworkers. You have the resources that DCP&P can provide to you. You have an potential adoption subsidy coming your way to help defray the costs of caring for that child. But there are cons. and some of them Judge Wright talked about earlier, which is an adoption. When you have a child under the guardianship of the state, you have to wait until, first and foremost, the rights of the biological parents are terminated, and that can take a long time. Just the initial process of getting to trial, whether you have a guardianship after trial or whether you have biological parents who surrender their rights, it typically doesn't happen right away. You could be waiting years, quite frankly. I have some DCP&P matters where the children have been placed in their eventual adoptive homes for years. Doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it does. Another thing you need to be aware about is that you will have DCP&P workers in your lives. And for a lot of families, that's a great thing. And for some families who are just more private, they don't want that kind of what they consider to be an intrusion. So you have to bear in mind that there's a give and take when you go the public adoption route. You won't be paying attorney's fees. You won't be paying for a home study or background checks. That's all covered by the state. So that is definitely something to consider. And another thing to consider is how desperately the children in the foster care system need forever homes. So I mean, to me, that's the greatest pro of all. When you're looking at a private situation, oftentimes you know the birth parent. You have an opportunity to understand the whys and the hows of why this child needs to be adopted. And that's a big thing. What you're then dealing with is a more expensive route. Certainly, you're going to pay attorney's fees out of pocket, home study fees out of pocket. You have to pay for criminal, federal, and state background checks. There's a lot that goes into it. Parent adoptions are less expensive because a home study isn't needed if you're married. And they typically are of a faster nature. So there are pros and cons depending on every single type of adoption you're looking at.
And just as a follow-up to that, is the home study the same whether you go through a foster care system or private?
So the only difference is who's going to conduct it. If you're doing a private adoption, your home study is going to be conducted by a private adoption agency. If you're going the foster care route, DCP&P themselves, they will take care of the home study. Because DCP&P is actually an accredited agency. It's considered an agency.
Okay. And next question is, which states allow open adoptions?
So I would always probably go to my friend Google just to quickly get you a whole list, but off the top of my head, Pennsylvania allows open adoptions. I know this because I had an interstate adoption issue recently where the birth parent was contemplating wanting to finalize under Pennsylvania law because Pennsylvania allows and will enforce open adoption agreements as opposed to New Jersey, which will not. It's an easy question to ask Google, but if I were ever to have an adoption matter that was interstate, I would always do my research just to figure out where the most beneficial law is for my client.
Is it beneficial to adoptive parents to have an open adoption?
Every case is different.
Okay.
Every case is different. It depends on the relationship that you have. I don't think that there's ever a downside to an adopted child knowing where they're coming from, but I think you have to look at the history of the relationship, the reasons why the child needed to be adopted, and it is definitely not a one answer fits all kind of question.
Okay. The next one is really about the birth certificate. Is that a simple task to get a birth certificate for the child? And what does that birth certificate look like? What's going to be on it?
Okay, so once an adoption is finalized, your adoption attorney should provide to you a brand new birth certificate, should obtain it for you and have it sent to you. So what happens is this: once the adoption is finalized, we in working with the surrogates court have what's called a report of adoption. We send that report of adoption to Trenton along with a check for a new birth certificate fee, and a new birth certificate will be issued for the adopting parents that lists the child's name. And in many cases, that'll be a new name if the adopting parents opt to change the name of the child. And we'll list the adopting parents as the parents on that birth certificate. And that can take anywhere from 6 weeks to a couple of months to be issued. We get that sent directly back to my office for my matters. As soon as we get it back, we forward it to the client.
May I ask you a question, Counselor? I have seen some pleadings that provide the proposed judgment of adoption, a decretal paragraph indicating that the board of whatever shall issue a new birth certificate in the name of such and such. Do you use that kind of language in your proposed order?
Yes. Yes, and I believe that our judgments, it's something like 30 days. It really never happens in 30 days. They're backed up. Everybody's remote now, especially because of COVID, everything is backed up. But we provide to Vital Statistics a copy of the judgment of adoption along with the report of adoption. And then we get the new birth certificate submitted. For anyone out there in the public who's listening right now, I will say this. The cost involved with getting the new birth certificate is, in New Jersey, it's $27, okay? Every state is different. If you're going into New York City, it's $55. I mean, every place is different, but New Jersey is $27. If at the same time you're ordering your initial first new birth certificate, if you want more processed, it's $2 for each additional at that time. So my advice to anyone listening who's about to adopt, order like 5. Because if you only order the one and then you want to go back a few years later because your kid is entering school, your kid is playing sports, your kid wants to apply to college, you don't know what you did with that birth certificate. You have to go back and start over again. You pay a larger fee to get more certified copies processed. But if you do it at the initial time that you're getting the new birth certificate, it's $2 each for each additional. So, for example, when we finalize, when my office finalizes DCP&P adoptions, DCP&P covers the cost of that first new birth certificate, right? So they'll cover as part of what they're paying out the $27. We will always send a link to our client saying, hey, if you want, 3 additional ones, here's a credit card link, $6. It's worth it because later on you're going to end up having to pay more. So the cost is not overbearing. Sometimes it's dealing with the actual technical aspects of having to get it later are frustrating. Get yourself, instead of 1, get yourself 3 or 4.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is there a preferred age group for potential adoptive parents? I know you talked about the deep dive into the, with the home study. So is there like a picture of what an adoptive parent situation should look like?
No, no, absolutely not. I think that anyone who's got the capacity to love and care and nurture for a child is going to be given the same advantages and disadvantages, and I don't see any problem. I mean, we always have, especially through my DCP&P adoptions, we have grandparents adopting their grandchildren. I've even had great grandparents adopting their grandchildren. And it might, it's at a certain age, it might not be as easy to bend down and get down on the ground with them, but quite honestly, no, I don't think anyone's going to be at a disadvantage. The only thing is you actually could be too young. You have to be over age 18, obviously, but you also have to be at least 10 years older than the party you're seeking to adopt. But other than that, no.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, so this question comes from a different perspective. So if for reasons of their own, an expectant parent is considering putting their child up for adoption and hasn't really decided and they don't know what to do, whether they go through foster care or private, what should they do if considering that? How do you advise them? Does an attorney, how does that work?
So I think if somebody's considering giving their child up for adoption, are you talking about maybe somebody who's pregnant or somebody who actually has a child and they just can't really care for them?
Here, let me just interject here. I'm not really sure that either of us have the right letters behind our name to answer that question. That's a sociological question. That's a personal question. That's a religious question. I'm not sure we can answer that or should answer that.
I think should is a good answer there, Judge. Perhaps could, but I agree with you. That's very subjective, depending on the family situation, the child's situation, whether things are going to improve, they're never going to improve. There are a lot of factors.
Yeah.
I will say, just with respect to that, if there is a parent out there who is struggling with that kind of a potential decision, call a support system to get some advice, whether that means calling an adoption attorney to understand what that means, whether that means calling your family, your friends, whomever. Get a team behind you.
Okay. The next question is, do you need to be financially well off to start the adoption process and go through it?
Again, it depends on which route you're looking to take. Well off is a very vague term. You don't need to be wealthy to adopt, certainly not. There is, they don't want you to be below the poverty level because home studies will want to know that you can support the child and provide for their basic needs. And with the case of a foster adoption, that's where adoption subsidies often come in. You're not going to be disqualified from being a foster parent because you don't earn as much as somebody else. If you are opting to go private adoption route, or even more so, I would say an agency adoption, just the cost of that alone, I don't see how anyone can do that. If you don't have a significant amount of money saved up, it's super expensive to do an agency adoption.
Right.
But in terms of being approved, I think as long as you are making a basic living, that shouldn't stop you.
Laurie, I previously asked you the question as to whether there was assistance that would be available after adoption. Now, you're talking about under or over poverty level. What about when we get to college age? Certainly there are student loans available. Are there anything, any loans, any programs, anything available to children of adoption specifically, maybe to families who are not well off, that would enable them to pursue further education that maybe the family can't afford?
That is an excellent question, and I don't know the answer. That's such a good question. I would be shocked if there weren't programs, scholarships, grants out there that are specifically geared toward children approaching college age who have been adopted through foster care. I would be shocked if there weren't.
I mean, you think
but I don't
about
know
there's things that are available if a parent has passed away and it's a single parent family. So one would like to think that there would be resources that would be available to assist these children.
I can absolutely tell you that I have handled division cases or currently am involved in division cases. Now, I don't know if they're the adopted child, but I'm talking specifically about children who are in the independent living phase who have received full college scholarships.
And I see we just got a response from one of our panelists, actually. Thank you so much, Paul Sakala, who said that regarding education, that foster adoptions get access to New Jersey public colleges at reduced cost. That's fabulous. I mean, that's great. That's great to know.
Mr. Sakala.
Thank you for chiming in on that. I appreciate that from the audience.
Okay, so the next question is, and we've talked about the foster families. So if you're interested in adopting, so do you sign up with DCPP and become a foster family and then you work towards becoming an adoptive parent? How does that all work for someone who's interested in moving in that direction?
So for someone who's interested in moving toward that direction, contact your local DCPP office, okay? And they can get you set up with what you need to go through to be what's called a licensed home. Okay, so you go through the process where you go through some training and you become an open licensed home so that foster children can be placed with you. And that's basically the beginning. But you will get the training you need. They will make sure that your home is ready to accept children. And when I say your local office, make sure it's within the county where you reside.
Okay. And I think we have time for one more question. So we talked a little bit about the intrusiveness of that home study. So are there many that don't go through and pass? I mean, or is this?
Not really? No. I mean, I think once you're committed to this process, you're committed to it. It's just helpful to know going in. There's going to be looking into you and your spouse, or if you're alone, just into you and your background. And
Well,
that's
isn't it
okay.
also every adult in the household?
We'll
even
have
other
background checks.
children?
Yes. Yes. Every adult in the household will have background checks. So if you are somebody looking to adopt and you're in the process and your mother is living with you, her criminal history is going to be looked at. You know, her fingerprints are going to be taken. If you have an 18-year-old kid living with you, they're going to be looked at too. Any legal adult in your home is going to be looked at.
Okay. All right. I'm going to turn the program back over to Surrogate Darling. Thank you all for your comments and answer to the questions.
Thank you, Christina. I hope that today was informative to people. And my greatest hope from bringing this forward today is that it leads to the formation of more families as a result of people watching this and perhaps learning that there are resources available, and this process is not something that you have to do alone. You have attorneys like Laurie Steinberg that are out there that are thrilled to be able to help children find families and families find children. You have wonderful judges like Judge Wright, who not only sit on the bench, but who actually care about the people that come before them, and especially have a very soft spot, I know, in his heart for children. I've seen it in front of him many times when I was practicing. So today's session will be available on my website, morrissurrogate.com, effective next week. As always, you may contact me at surrogate@co.morris.nj.us if you have any questions that you would like to circulate, that you have a need for more information on. Judge Wright, I cannot thank you enough. I know you're a very busy man. I know you have a hectic schedule. The courts are sort of shut down and everybody's working from home, and you've got limited time to get everything done. And Laurie, I know your caseload is extensive. You're uniting families every day, including this morning with the judge here in Morris County. I appreciate the knowledge, the time that you've given today. And I can't thank you both enough. And I hope that everyone who watched got some valuable information. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.
Before we disconnect, Madam Surrogate, thank you and your office for the daily work that you do with regard to adoptions. But this activist role, actually stepping out of your office and going the extra yard to communicate necessary information, is laudable to the extreme. I want to thank you personally for it and for the opportunity to participate. I actually roped Attorney Steinberg into this, and as everyone who's participated can see why. Thank you for your acumen and your participation, and Christina, for putting this together. God bless you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Laurie.